And before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge that Kluge-Ruhe and the Fralin are located on the land of the Monacan Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And since we're all joining from locations around the world, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous nations where each of us are located. And I encourage you, if you don't know who those nations are or those peoples are, that you find out and that you learn about them and their art and their culture. I'm going to pass us off to my co-moderator, Lisa.
Right. Thank you, Lauren. Well, we want to welcome everyone to the 6th webinar in this series where the Fralin Museum of Art and the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection, both museums at the University of Virginia, are investigating art forms that don't typically show up in the museum. We felt that there are all kinds of art forms that are culturally dense, deeply tied to identity, and formally and technically complex that deserved our attention. Often these are taken for granted because they are a part of our daily lives and aren't set aside or labeled as deserving our full attention. So as we begin, each speaker will talk for about 5 minutes about their own relationship with the world of textile design. We will then ask a few questions that apply to all the speakers to guide a discussion, and then we'll open it up for a live Q&A. And as a reminder, Lauren mentioned that we will do our best to get to as many questions as we can and as time allows. So let's begin with our first speaker and my friend, Diane Kappa.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Diane Kappa, and I am a surface and pattern designer here in Seattle, Washington. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my background. Art has always been a huge part of my life. My mom was an artist, a painter, and eventually she was also my high school art teacher. So my sister and I were always encouraged to draw, color, sew, even learn how to make pottery, which led me to want to be a painter as a child. My mom encouraged me to go down a more practical career path of either graphic design or fashion design, thinking that this way I could be creative but still be able to make a living. So I went to the University of Cincinnati where I met Lisa and got my degree in fashion design. And it was here that I was introduced to computer-aided design and textiles. And then I also had a very influential teacher who encouraged me to take a more fine art approach to my senior thesis. So I painted about, I think it was around 20 yards of silk for my final collection in college. So after college, I worked in the corporate world as a print designer for about 15 years, 11 of those with Nordstrom in their product development. And I've designed everything from kids' clothing to women's wear to home furnishings. And then in 2008, my husband and I fulfilled a lifelong dream and moved to Budapest, Hungary for about 4 years. And it was here that I started my own business. And I figured if I could design for textiles, why not expand into other products and substrates? So today my business focuses on 2 areas. First, I license my art to manufacturers of fabric, tabletop, paper products, floor coverings, garden decor. Basically, if you're looking around your house and there is a pattern or an illustration on it, somebody like myself has drawn or painted that. I also do a large amount of consulting with companies who have a creative vision but need help creating the actual art. So ironically, I guess I've kind of come full circle in that I never thought I'd be a fine artist, and I might not be creating paintings that are in a museum, but I'm definitely painting, cutting lino, sketching on a daily basis. And fabric is still my favorite product to design for. I like the idea of being part of a creative process. So I'm creating the fabric that a crafter or maker might see and be inspired by to then take it to the next level and make a skirt, a quilt, or a pillow. So that's a bit about me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about Mili and Kieren. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. We're gonna move on and let Kieren introduce himself as well as Kathy.
Hi everyone, and welcome. I'm Kathy Laudenbach. I'm the manager of Merrepen Arts, Culture and Language, which is situated in Nayu, Daly River, which is at the top of Australia. And I work alongside Kieren Karritjpul, who is our senior arts worker and senior artist in Australia, and he's going to talk to you today. Just a reminder to the audience that English is Kieren's fifth language. So, but he's speaking clearly in English today. Thank you.
My landscape, my culture. Welcome everyone. My name is Kieren Karritjpul. I am 27 years old, Australian Indigenous man. I was born in Darwin, which is the largest city in the top of Australia. After my birth, my mother whispered my traditional totems and dreamings into my ears. Some of these are stars, clouds, kingbird snake, water, rainbow, sand frog, and pelican. My totems and dreamings were handed down to me from my mother, grandfather, and great-grandfather. In our culture, totems make you who you are. They inform you and guide your life. In the dream time, totems were thought to be human. The dream time is a commonly used term for describing Aboriginal spiritual beliefs and experience. Dream time is a foundation of Australian Indigenous religion and culture. Aboriginal people believe that the dream time dates back some 65,000 years. The land, the people were created by the spirits. They made the rivers, streams, waterholes, the land, hills, rocks, plants, and animals. It is believed that the spirits gave them their hunting tools and each tribe its lands, the totems and the dreamings. My mother and grandmother are artists and weavers, and when I was 5 years old, I decided to be an artist. I told my mother and grandmother, and they supported me. In my culture, there is traditionally a line between what women can do and men can do. For example, men are not allowed to weave. So at a young age, I decided to paint and draw weavings to explain and interpret weaving in another way. So many of my works start with ideas of weaving, but are also about who we are as Aboriginal Indigenous people, our culture and our traditions. Recently, I am also thinking about the preservation of our land and the preservation of our culture for future generations. I want my work to be a positive message for all people. I work across various mediums, including painting, drawing, textile, print making, and ceramics. I don't delineate in my practice between fine art or art. I use the same skill base and ideas for everything that I do. I have learned to be an artist from my elders, not in an art school. My love of painting and textile design comes from being able to tell stories passed down to me from my elders and incorporate these stories into new ways by placing these on textiles, paintings, and prints. Everything starts with drawing. Sometimes I draw with a pencil, sometimes a brush, and sometimes a stick. In my textile designs, I draw from the same knowledge as with all my art forms. For me, textile design is the same as the other art forms. I love them all. Now I will talk about a couple of my work. Weaving myself, the landscape, and the land was painted using two brushes, including one I made using my own hair to further place myself in the painting. In this painting, that is 6 meters across, broken into 2 sections. I use the weaving process as a visual metaphor for land and landscape. This painting is a metaphor view of the woven surface that stands for the breathing land of this country. I was born woven into the land, using repetition and line. I have created a surface that moves like human breath. The painting took me 3 months to paint. I paint on the floor of my room and roll a little bit out each time as I paint. I didn't see the final work
So that's it there, that's on the screen. Sorry, yeah.
until it was hung to be photographed. Fish trap basket fabric.
Yeah.
This fabric is designed on the idea of a traditional fish trap. The design takes up the whole fabric width. I want people to be informed about traditions and culture.
Yeah.
Fish traps were used to catch fish in the rivers and billabongs. They were placed in the river at low tide. Then, when the tide comes in, the fish float in.
Yeah, that's
Another one of my designs is also based around fishing. It is called fishnet. It is a design of a fishnet on the ground.
okay. Maybe just that's probably enough. But Kieren, I'll just show you this. Kieren's work is on the cover of this book that we're holding up, and maybe you can have a look at it later. And it's where it's 5 art centres from the top end in a big show that's been curated at the Fralin Museum at the University of California, and it will open on the 15th of December this year. It's been a bit delayed because of the COVID, and Kieren's basket design is on the cover, and also 7 of our artists feature in that exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kieren. There's so much to unpack already. I feel like. So we'll move on to Mili. Mili, we're excited to hear more about your work.
Yeah, hi. My name is Mili, and I was born in Bombay, India, and I grew up in the Middle East. My family moved to the Middle East when I was a year old in Oman, which is about 3 hours from Dubai. Let's see, I came to the States in 1998, so I've been here about 22 years. I went to school, went to university and graduated in sociology, and then went back and graduated in graphic design. Most of my career has been in graphic design. About 8 years ago, I decided to change my medium, I suppose, and explore the world of textiles. I am very passionate about interior design and the home space. And so my vision was to create a line of textiles for home. Although I was not formally trained as an interior designer, neither am I a textile designer nor a weaver. But yet we have landed up here 8 years later. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit in me, and I think that has guided me a lot. And I just intuitively have grown my business and sort of asked myself what does the industry need next, or what would they like to see from my line. I'd like to share a little bit about the line itself. My line is called KUFRI, KUFRI, which is a hill station in India. It snows, it's on top of a mountain. It's a really beautiful little place where people go for respite. And I fell in love with handloom weaving and block printing. And I just explored the villages in India. I didn't really know anyone who did textiles. So it was purely just an exploration and discovery to see what I liked myself. And as I fell in love with handloom weaving, I learned how to design for weaving. It's very different from designing for print. As a graphic designer, it's easier to design for print, but in weaving, you're designing with a lot of restrictions. But through a lot of trial and error, I have learned how to design for weaving. And I am based now out of Dallas, Texas. I have a small showroom and studio, and it is filled with all our textiles and applications of our textiles, which is upholstery and drapery and pillows and lampshades. And we have a couple of looms in our studio. And when we are ready to design a new collection, I have my resident weaver come in and we work together very closely. I'm sure we'll have some questions about process and such, but before the pandemic, I was visiting India, all our weaving villages, pretty much every year. It is very important for me to stay in close touch with them. But I guess so a lot of interior designers are the ones who are primarily exposed to my line, and they use it in their projects, which are then seen in magazines, House Beautiful and Elle Decor and all those beautiful glossy magazines we like to look at. I also have a small retail component where you can buy product online. I guess I'd like to finish my introduction by saying what textiles means for me. Textiles to me is really a connector, and it has helped me connect with people from all over the world, such as right now. And I'm able to do all my different things that I love in it. I'm able to do my graphic design and create catalogs and do creative direction and direct photo shoots. I'm able to design a collection. I am able to interact with people all over the world. So for me, it has really been a connector, and I have met incredible people and incredible talent. And I think that is why it fulfills me. It is not as much about the product. It is more about that connection that it creates for me. So that's a little bit about me. And yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Mili. Thanks to all three of you. Gosh, I had all these questions ready to go, and now I want to go in totally different directions. So my first question actually does have to do with process, because I know you're each kind of approaching textile design from a different perspective. So if you could each just speak a little bit about, in terms of like specifically textile design, because I know, Diane and Mili, actually all three of you are working in other media. So maybe talk about the medium of textile design that you're working in, whether it's silk screen printing or block printing or weaving. I know, Mili, you mentioned that, but then also how that medium connects to other media that you all have mentioned. So like, how does your painting inform your textile design? How does your graphic design inform your textile design? So yeah, I'm not sure that's a very clear question, but hopefully we can clarify as we go along if it's not. Diane, do you want to start?
Sure. It's kind of a hard question for me, I guess. 10 years ago, it would have affected textiles a lot more because digital printing wasn't so affordable and common. And so every time I created a design that was going to be printed, I had to take into consideration how many colors I was using. Watercolors were really hard to replicate onto fabric from a commercial sense. But now digital printing has come such a long way that it's easy to produce really detailed patterns that are millions of colors without having to cut screens and use those more traditional methods. So before, I guess my painting and drawings were a bit more restricted because of the printing method, but now I can, the gates are open. I can design however I want, knowing that digital printing is such a common option. So.
Kieren or Mili, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I can share a little bit. So we work in handloom weaving and block printing. We only use those two artisan processes. I used to do some screen printed fabrics. That was my very first collection almost 8 years ago. But now it has solely become, I would say, 70% handloom weaving and 30% block printed. So for me, though, that's really important because my goal is to keep it boutique and artisan. It has, I think, the technology, and I don't know if I'm completely answering the question, but I think technology has opened the door and a lot of people are doing digital printing, and it has really just thrown the gates wide open. And this was like, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. So there's so many boutique lines these days, but I think it's important to stick with what you are passionate about, and we're passionate about the artisan part of it, specifically those two processes. So gonna stay in our lane there.
Kieren, do you want to talk a little bit about how your textile design connects to some painting? You kind of talked about that a little bit in your introduction.
Well, for me as an Indigenous Australian, Aboriginal people, they used to do paintings on like rock art and stuff, and then we got introduced to do paintings on canvases to tell our stories and to show the world. And then we decided to do design for screen printing. So at the Art Center, we do a lot of screen printing and lino printing here. And it's a good, important thing to do to show the next generation upcoming, so they can do what we are doing to tell our stories and to keep our context.
And it all kind of is together, isn't it?
Together.
Like, so people might be surprised to know that most people in this community go out into the bush every afternoon to get their food and, collecting food like fish or turtle, kidna, and also berries, all different fruits. And Kieren especially does that. It usually takes a carload of people after work. And then that sort of is a place where you get a lot of ideas. You come back and talk about that. And so that feeds what he might do. Like it might be the design for fabric or painting or, So it all sort of goes together.
So drawing from those more traditional sort of practices, but of gathering and hunting, but also being those into even things going back thousands of years like rock art, but applying those to this new surface of silk screen printing. Yeah, that's interesting.
The idea of drawing, but not this sort of iconography, if you like, so he doesn't take the designs from the past, but just the idea of the practices of drawing.
Awesome. Well, you each. Go ahead, Diane.
I was going to say, I'm coming from such a different place from Kieren and Mili, just from, I guess I'm doing so much more commercial art, I guess. But what I would say with digital printing versus like the block printing and weaving and things is I think digital printing has made an appreciation for artisan craft for people to have that appreciation. Maybe they had kind of forgotten about. I mean, I know me personally, I actually love block printed fabric and knowing who the artist was who made the textile that I bought. So it's just an interesting dynamic between how digital printing has been on the rise, but I think this love for knowing who the artist was, where your fabric came from, and if it was hand done, I mean, that's just a bonus, right? So that's all.
Yeah, it's interesting how I like that you brought that point to the forefront, Diane, because it's easy to think like of digital as less, but really in some ways it just draws more attention, or can draw even more attention to the fineness of those handmade products, which is really, or textiles, which is really interesting. Yeah, so you each have talked in your introduction a little bit about sort of like your heritage and your family connection. So I know, Diane, you talked about your mom, and Kieren talked about his elders and his parents and grandparents and family. And Mili, I think you touched on that a little bit as well. I would love to hear more about like how those family connections inform each of your work in different ways. I feel like that's one of the first times we've heard that in this program. That family has been like such a huge part of the making of a design, or of a pattern, or of a or of an art form. So if you can each speak to that a little bit more, I think that would be fascinating. Anyone can go first.
Chime in. I think family. So I don't have any direct family here in the States. Just my husband. My whole family still is back in the Middle East. And I think family definitely informed a lot of my work, because initially when I was transitioning from graphic design and looking into textiles, my whole goal was to be able to do something in India so I could be closer to the Middle East. So Oman is 2.5 hours plane ride from Oman to India. So my goal was, well, if I do this business and work with people in India, then I can meet my parents more often, or I can ask them to fly over and meet me in India, which is exactly what I've done for 8 years. The first 2 years, my father came on trips with me, and then my mother came on every trip with me to all the production units and villages. So my mother is from the eastern part of India, and my father is from the western part of India. And my mother, she was Christian, and my father is Muslim, and she converted to Islam after marrying him. So I have a very confused and mixed up, but in a good way, outlook on life. And I think that definitely goes into my textiles, because you'll notice like the block prints are very different from the weaving. Like they look different, but still they look like, oh yeah, they're very rustic and imperfectly perfect. Like they could all belong in the family together. But I always consider East and West quite a bit when I'm designing. And also my mom's family grew up in a more village kind of area. So I also find myself drawn to a lot of tribal patterns and tribal design, like the Australian, Aboriginal art that Kieren's talking about. And like, I love all that. I can just, soak it all in. So I think that's how it reflects in my work, little East and West.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Mili.
I think for me, it was just the influence of my mom, always being around artists and art supplies, and there was always some sort of summer camp pottery, something that my sister and I were getting encouraged to do. As an adult, my grandmother was also a huge influence, just because she's a quilter and a sewer, and even Like I remember even in high school and junior high when we would have these formal dances, I would art direct my grandma. So we would go and we'd buy the commercial pattern and I'd say, okay, this is the dress I want you to sew for me. Here are the fabrics. And then I would say, but I don't want those sleeves and I don't want that bow and I want this to be, so we were changing things up. But as far as my everyday designing now, as far as my, I guess my job or as a surface designer, there's little, I don't know if it's even fair to say, but there's little influence there outside of just being kind of encouraged to do this as a living. But I do so much personal work on this side, and that's really where my family comes in, is my things that I've been thinking about that will then show up in that art, which is very different from the stuff that I've shown here. So.
That's great. Kieren, did you want to speak to the connections with your family and your work? They're probably very rich and layered.
In my when I was little, I used to hang around my mother, grandmother, and great grandmother since I was a baby, growing up to being around about 9, 10. I used to still hang around them, and then I went to the local school here in Nauru, in Australia, and I used to go to school every day and come back after school and then go out bush with my mom and grandma and learning how to survive in the bush, like to look for bush tucker or local tools to use to get the bush food from the bush. And then growing up to being a teenager, I was gonna go to boarding school, but then I ran away from boarding school because I didn't like to be away from my home and living in the bush. So my grandmother took me out to the Billabong and we stayed up there. And then I didn't end up going back to school, and then we started to make art. And I learned a lot from my family about my culture and knowledge and my language, and to be living in a community now, doing art and stuff, showing the next generation that is coming up behind me. Because in our culture, that is very important for to teach the young ones that are coming up. Whether you like it or not, you have to obey the rules.
That's beautiful. So not just looking to your mom and your grandmother and your community that's older than you, but also looking ahead to the future generations and teaching them too. That's really interesting.
And in there, Kieren's mother is a well-known Australian artist as well, and a linguist. She's got an Order of Australia for books she's written, and she's a well-known weaver particularly, but she's also a fabric designer. And also Kieren's grandmother and great-grandmother are weavers, and that's who used to hang around watching them weave. But also they've both got fabric and painting backgrounds.
A big artist family. A family full of artists. It's wonderful. You've all spoken in different ways about sort of the commercial end of your practice. And I'm just interested in sort of those collaborations. So, it seems like the collaborations for each of you are different, or reveal themselves maybe in different ways. So if you could each just speak to sort of like how your work ends up in the commercial sphere, and what that sort of process and collaboration is like, because that's something that doesn't often, well, actually, it's a huge part of the fine art world. But I think a lot of people think of that connection as being more direct somehow, maybe in the fine art world, and it's not always the case. So I think it would be interesting just to sort of hear how it goes from design to, being on a shelf in a store, or being available to purchase online.
I think maybe, go on, Kathy.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'll just speak quickly maybe about that. So we just sell directly to the public. Like, we have a big printing studio here, and so so we just sell to people who do sewing, like wholesale, or to galleries. Sorry. So that's the main way we distribute what we do. And it's last year, Kieren was the awarded the Australian Indigenous Textile Artist of the Year, and that was in 2020. And from that has sort of led to a lot of interest from commercial people in Australia, like doing different things with him on another level, really. So it's not directly with the fabric that he's printing, but with his designs from his printing. And I was talking earlier to Lauren about Country Road, which is quite a large company in Australia they have clothes but also homewares. And Kieren's currently working with the homewares branch of Country Road on a range of platters and table napkins, table runners, tablecloths, but that's being sort of produced by them in collaboration with us from his designs. Yeah. So it'll be a sort of commercial production.
I have a question for Kieren.
Yeah.
So how your art seems so personal and so rich with culture. How do you feel about having it produced on an item that's, I don't want to say mass market, but that's more mass produced than what you're currently doing? Does that make sense?
Yes. What do you think about having Country Road producing this stuff? What do you think about that? Do you think you're losing control or anything, or what? Do you like it?
Yeah, I like what it.
Yeah, you like it.
I like
Yeah.
I think it's all right. It's kind of been, I think, like, it's sort of exciting. Like, it's like what we're doing today. Like, we've had heaps and heaps of Zoom meetings with Ty Simons, who's the head of Homewares Country Road Australia. And like, you've been consulted all the way. Kieren's totally involved with those meetings. And
something new.
And it's something new. And I think
Didn't do before.
yeah, you've never done that before. And I think you just, is that right? Yeah, no one makes anyone do anything, you know. You're approached, and Kieren thought, oh yeah, let's give it a go. Like, we didn't even know Ty before. We've also been approached by some other people, fashion designers, particularly in Australia, and some of them we haven't. It's like, obviously Kieren's an artist, but he has to make money from it. So we, have to set up contracts and look at all of that, what you're talking about, what sort of control will he have over the designs. Yeah. So anything else about it? Yeah. Okay.
I asked because, I have this, it's not related to textiles, but I have this very personal art that I create. So it's lino block printing and a little bit of mixed media with it, which is so personal and isn't something that that typically isn't something that goes on to my more commercial art. And it's also art that I don't really care to know what anybody thinks about it, because I've created it for myself. Whereas the art that I create for a floor covering or garden decor, if my client wants to change the color and change the flower, I don't care. It's more about the process for me than the thing that I'm painting. Whereas the personal art, that's the piece that I don't want mass produced, because that's the piece that is part of me. That's why I asked, because you're sort of crossing that line for me. And so I'm like, oh, how do you feel like to see something kind of so personal onto, yeah. So it's interesting, and it is exciting too. I can relate to that. So.
Yeah, Kieren, what did you say?
Like for that question, like if that person wants to ask us if they want to use that design, they have to ask what part, like if say a fishnet or a mermaid, they have to ask permission like to use that part. Otherwise, we feel
Violated
Yeah.
kind of friendship. Yeah, yeah. So you wouldn't want to people to run amok with
run
the
amok
designs?
with a design and
Yeah.
change,
Mhm.
put like a something on top of the design or change the color. It's
Mm. But Kieran's often like we live near the city of Darwin, which is the biggest city in the top of Australia, and it's pretty quirky. It's tropical climate, but it's pretty quirky, fashionable kind of place. And lots of people buy our Merrepen fabric and make clothes. And we often see people wearing that fabric, don't we? You've commented that you really liked it. Yeah, we see people in different dresses, and there's a beautiful shop called Royal Cloth that makes beautiful ball gowns out of Kieran's fabric, and they're one-off pieces. And yeah, we always go in there, don't we, and talk to Rhonda. Yeah.
There's a quick audience question that has to do with this Country Road project, and then I want to get to Mili because I want to hear her answer to this question too. But somebody's question had to do with whether a Country Road is going to acknowledge each of the designs used and the significance of the story that goes with that design when it gets to the shelf in the store, or like is that heritage of the design going to be with it at the end point or not? Do we know yet?
Yeah, very definitely. We've signed a very detailed contract. Like artists in Australia, like us, we work with lawyers. And obviously, I mean, everyone probably does all over the world, but there's an agency called Arts Law, and we, very much a part of them and their lawyers. And so we drew up a very strict contract. So it's a limited production, and Kieren, part of it, he will be part of the promotion, and the stories will be part of it. So his face.
So he gets to go with the design, Diane. He doesn't have to let it go.
He'll probably get. But most of Australia, not us, but most of Australia's in lockdown. So we'll wait and see. The actual production and hitting the shelves, I suppose, has been delayed quite. It should be there now. And the plan was their headquarters in Melbourne, and we would have gone. But we don't know. But because of COVID, we don't know when. We're just we haven't actually like maybe next year now. But yeah.
So
no, it's very strict conditions.
For you, Mili, can you talk about collaborations in your practice? Because it seems like it's such a huge part of what you're doing.
Yeah. So are you wanting to know like how those connections are made between, when we design to like how the connections are made, or just like I'm still trying to get a little bit of clarity?
Yeah, I guess just like you talked in your introduction about designing for weaving and how that process was different. How does the collaboration with the weavers themselves work, and how did you initiate those relationships? How have they grown over time?
With the weavers, I mean, once I go there in the beginning, I could see the type, because weaving is very regional in India. And so like weaving in the South, the designs are quite different than some other parts. So I would really kind of try to understand what these designs and how they're different in different regions. And I adapted myself how I was designing based on their skill level and regionality. And also, like sometimes if I design something, the weaver will be like, this isn't possible, So there was there was that, but by and large, the design comes from me and the colors, because a lot of times they are disconnected from what the Western market wants. And while, of course, I want these to be these beautiful, some of them are ethnic, the designs, I still need to make sure that they are applicable to the market here and that it would suit a home here. As far as going from design and finally ending up, say, um, in a project that gets published, and my fabric is all on the sofa or on the drapery, we have different distribution methods. So we have exclusive showrooms. They're basically like stores, but only the designers know they exist. So your city may have a design district. Like our city, Dallas, it has a design district, but retail public doesn't really go there. It's really just the designers who go and shop over there, and that's where we sell our product. Or I have built through branding and marketing and a lot of in-person travel and presentations. So I will actually take my fabrics, get an appointment, present it on the table to a firm, and that's how they come to know about me. And then based on what project they have, they will um, might want to purchase the fabric to use in the project. And sometimes I just see it in the magazine. Like I don't really know where it lands up or how it lands up. I just see it in the magazine and I'm like, oh, I guess that happened. And other interesting collaborations have happened. Like there was a lady that makes these beautiful clutches, and she had a team of refugees and refugee workers here in Dallas who used to make all the clutch pouches and the accessories. So we collaborated and she designed some textiles and we wove it for her. And I guided her on, no, you can't do this, or yes, you can do this. And it created a beautiful collection of, accessories. So that's an example of a collaboration as well.
Yeah, there was an audience question that kind of gets at a little bit of what you're talking about in this collaboration with the communities that you work with. There was a question, Pearl is asking how you ensure that the artisans are paid like equitably and that they gain a fair share of the revenue.
So they do yearly, every year they increase their fee. And they are well aware, like I'm not the only person, I'm not the only foreign brand that's creating textiles with them. So they are actually, it is not like we used to think. Now people know about fair wages, people know how much they should get paid, artisans know. And even in the villages in India, it is not as remote as we really think it is. They have Wi-Fi and they are well aware, they have customers all over the world. So it's not as much that I have to keep a watch on something like that. They tell me how much they want to get paid and I will make sure they're getting that paid. Besides that, we always help them. During the pandemic, we do fundraising, and during the holiday or Diwali is a big festival in India. We'll send money to the villages. So yeah, I think there's this notion that people are not getting paid fairly, but it's just not. It's everyone knows now how much they should get. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that, Mili. I'm going to ask one more question, and there's some really good Q&A questions. And if anybody else in the audience wants to answer a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A and we'll try to get to it. But obviously textiles are different from fine art. In museums, fine art is not to be touched most of the time. And so much of textiles has to do with like the physical act of touching and feeling or wearing that fabric. So I'm interested to hear how each of you sort of think about that quality or that sense of touch while you're designing your work, if at all.
when I was in college, and then it's been a while since I've painted silk, but every time I pick that back up again, that's a very tactile experience for me because it's silk, so it's smooth. The way the color reacts with the silk and the richness of it. And then when I was doing pillows, they were down-filled pillows, so everything was soft. The fabric was soft, the inside was soft, and I consider kind of the pillows as being almost like a canvas for your couch because it's still, you can see a good piece of art. You can, I took into consideration composition and things like that. So in most of my art I create now, that's not such a it's not such a thought because I'm not weaving, or I think the other two artists will have something more interesting to say, but I can only relate because of the silk pillows. So.
Like for me, the design that I do on fabric, when we paint and then print on the fabric, it's really, I don't see people, like how they're gonna feel the fabric or think it. It's really good to see them wearing it, and you see them walking and you feel proud and happy, because if it was like more a fishnet that's been made from the same palm or pendants, you feel the fiber there, it's like a grassy thing, and then on the fabric you just see that the design is in with the fabric, and it's really floaty as like a, in the wind it's floating, but on the main lily bag or fishnet basket it's just stiff and it's still, but then for the on the material you can see it moving and again moving again to another.
So there's a little, so what I hear you saying is there's a little bit of connection with the texture of the pandanus. So for those who don't know, the pandanus weaving that Kieren's been talking about is, pandanus is a palm tree in northern Australia, and it feels, once it's processed and dried, it feels quite kind of like scratchy and grassy. But what I also, so there's a connection with that, but then I also hear you saying that has a lot, you're thinking a lot more about how people are going to wear it and how it moves on the body than how necessarily it feels, which is really interesting. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Mili. Does the sense of touch inform your work at all?
Yeah, it really does, because if you look at my line, besides the block prints, the wovens, which is 70% of our line, the wovens are all about texture. And I don't like to do a whole lot of intricate designs in weaving. For me, it's really all about texture. And our weavers will, I'll specifically ask them to twist certain different types of yarn together, maybe a 2-ply and a 3-ply, maybe a silk and a cotton. So it's all about texture and creating that imperfectly perfect feel, where you can see all the slubs and you can touch the slubs and you can really see the reflection of the hand of the weaver in that fabric. I have a sample here. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yeah.
So it's a tool construction, but can you see the little slubs where the silk gathers and looks knotted up?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that's kind of what I mean, is that we're known for like doing that kind of tactile stuff. At the same time, you don't want it to be too scratchy. You want it to be soft. But I like the slubs and I like all that, the depth that different yarn can create together.
Awesome. We had a question from an audience member a while ago about about how you each have spent some time talking about your own cultural influences and how it inspires what you do. And this person was just asking if there were other, if you were influenced by any other cultures in the world when doing what you do.
I definitely am. Just because I love to travel, and so and travel and learning about the local culture and the local crafts, like just so that's a huge influence. Not directly, but just I miss that so much right now because of COVID. We haven't gone overseas or anything recently, and living in Budapest, they have a very rich. Hungary has a very rich embroidery, and actually, Mili, hearing you talk about India, Hungary was so much like that. You go to one town, and their embroidery was completely different than the neighboring town, and the colors were different, and they, one village only embroiders a specific tulip, whereas the neighboring village will never do that tulip because that is identified with this other village. So for me, I mean, it doesn't have a direct, I'm sure it has an indirect influence on my work just because I just love learning about that kind of art. But yeah.
I think that's really interesting, Diane. The folk. I know Hungary has so much folk element in their art. It's pretty cool. So the funny thing is that for me, New Mexico is such a huge influence. I actually feel more at home in New Mexico than I do anywhere in the world. And it's really bizarre. Like, I must be part Native American somewhere. But I created a whole collection that was from a few years of my traveling to New Mexico. Like, we'd go on road trips. It's about 11 hours from Texas, from Dallas. And we'd go 2 or 3 times a year. And I started looking at all the woodworking in New Mexico, the windows and the doors and the architectural elements. And that just percolated in my mind for a few years. And then I launched the block print collection. So the block print collection is really heavily influenced by New Mexico woodworking patterns and things like that, and just a sense of organic element. This is one of the patterns. It's called Roar, and this is from that New Mexico collection, and it was also photographed in Tesuque. So all the way from the design to the catalog production and the photography was done in New Mexico. So anyway, yeah, for me, it's New Mexico for sure.
I love New Mexico. We should definitely meet there, do some kind of art retreat.
Done.
Kieren, can you come?
Yes.
I would say is any other cultural influences. Which ones would you say?
When you see something similar to your,
Yeah.
like for us Aboriginal people, we have like tools and stuff, and sometimes when we're watching on the TV, we see the Native Americans, they have those feathers from birds, and then we have the same tools in Australia. Like we use those feathers from a bird, like for a fan or for traditional ceremonies. We have armbands and stuff on our head, Aboriginal people, and we have similar things to the Native Americans, or sometimes in India, some people approach us like in Darwin or somewhere and say, "Oh, we got to the local Aboriginal women," and they say that they have hair like Indian India people. Same long black hair or features with people from India or Native America. And like people from Africa, we have similarity stuff like for our body painting on our body for ceremonies, or when we have deaths in our families, for when we have funerals, everyday people get painted up. And sometimes we see on the TV like Africans or in India, we have similarities together.
And that
Those cross-cultural or cross-Indigenous connections are really inspiring to you, it sounds like. Yeah. Well, I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you all so much. This has been a fabulous discussion that has gone in so many interesting directions. Have a great night. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.